Ulf Hannerz' article, The World in Creolisation, explores how cultures in the modern world, particularly in the Third World, are continuously shaped by interactions between local traditions and global influences. His central idea is that cultures are not fixed or pure but are in constant transformation, a process he calls creolization. Using Nigeria as his main example, Hannes shows how cultural life emerges from the mixing of indigenous practices with external influences from colonialism, migration, education, media, and popular culture. Hannes begins the article by observing that anthropologists have often ignored the everyday cultural realities of third world society. While they have studied economic and political issues like development, dependency, and the world system, they have often neglected how ordinary people live and interpret their world. Similarly, those studying traditional culture tend to focus on isolated villages or small scale communities, overlooking urban life, media, and popular cultures. Hannes argues for a macro anthropology of culture, which would look at how culture functions in large, complex, interconnected societies. He describes contrasting ways Nigeria is usually represented. First, the ethnic mosaic view. Nigeria is seen as a collection of about 250 tribes with different languages and customs artificially grouped together by colonial powers. This view suggests that there is no real Nigerian culture, only fragmented ethnic cultures. Second, the world system view. Nigeria is often seen as a nation that has developed through colonial and post-colonial history. It is tied to global economic and cultural systems, and its people share experiences of education, administration, and media. This perspective highlights the emergence of a national culture that is more than just the sum of local traditions. Hannes argues that both views must be combined. Nigeria is indeed diverse, but it is also part of a global cultural flow that continually reshapes its natural identity. Traditional definitions of culture often assume unity and homogeneity. Culture in complex societies should be seen as a network of perspectives. People do not share exactly the same culture, rather, they have overlapping and contrasting viewpoints shaped by differences in education, occupation, class, ethnicity, and access to information. Cultures are not static systems but are always works in progress, maintained and transformed through a management of meaning, teaching, remembering, debating, and adapting ideas. To understand this process, Hannes uses the concept of creolization, borrowed from linguistics and colonial history. Just as Creole languages mix linguistic sources into a new, stable language, Creole cultures blend influences from multiple origins into new forms of meaning and expression. These cultural syntheses can be seen in music, art, religion, fashion, and everyday practices. They show that cultures are not simply threatened by global influences, but can actively rework them into something unique and vital. In Nigeria, schools are not just places for learning skills, but also spaces where students absorb global cultural models, often through a hidden curriculum that promotes urban, modern, and metropolitan values. Education sorts people into occupations and influences their worldviews, creating new social divisions and aspirations. Nigerian music, fashion, television, and newspapers are vibrant sites where global and local influences mix. For example, Western pop music circulates alongside Afrobeat by Fela Kuti, who himself combined African traditions with global styles and political messages. Popular culture reflects desires for modernity and sophistication, often contrasting with what is seen as bush or backward rural life. Importantly, foreign media like Dallas or Michael Jackson do not simply erase local culture, instead, they coexist with and even inspire new Nigerian creations. Hannes explains that culture in Nigeria, like in other countries, is shaped by center periphery relations. Major cities and Ibadan are cultural centers closely tied to global networks through academics, professionals, and elites. These groups act as cultural models, often imitating metropolitan lifestyles. At the periphery or rural villages, where global influences arrive more slowly and unevenly. Yet connections between city and countryside mean that cultural forms travel widely, creating a spectrum rather than isolated cultures. Migration also plays a role. Nigerians abroad in London or Paris form part of both their host societies and their home culture, feeding global influences back into Nigeria. Hannes stresses that creolization is not just passive absorption of outside culture. Local actors reinterpret, reshape, and sometimes resist foreign influences. Intellectuals, musicians, and writers in Nigeria, for example, critically engage with Western culture while promoting local identity. This interplay produces creativity, not uniformity. Instead of global homogenization, the world is moving toward a new kind of diversity where cultures are interconnected and constantly redefined. Hannes concludes the article by saying that we are all being creolized. This is not only true for former colonies but also for countries in Europe or elsewhere, which are influenced by migration, global media, and cultural flows. The creolization perspective allows anthropologists to see diversity and mixture as sources of cultural vitality rather than as signs of loss. It also ties culture to power and the world system, showing that meaning is always shaped by social and economic structures. Hannes calls for anthropology to embrace this macro perspective, acknowledging that the world's cultures are interconnected and in continuous transformation.